Alright guys, we are on our way to the Universal Ostrich Farm in Edgewood, BC. In fact, I'm just around the corner. This is beautiful out here. I made it here at the Universal Ostrich Farm. If you're not familiar with what's going on with this story, you really need to be. Basically, what we have here is a case of a few of these birds apparently contracting the avian influenza virus, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has determined that these nearly 400 healthy birds must be culled. In other words, killed. Obviously, this is a travesty. If this can happen to small-time farmers, what's to stop this to happening, you know, with your cows or your horses, or maybe even someday, you know, your pets. So this particular story has actually become rather of a highly contentious issue that seems to have divided some people because of the fact that these are not actually meat birds that are meant for human consumption, but rather these are research birds who are meant to conduct research into the eggs that they produce and the potential antibodies that can come from these eggs. Now, a lot of people have discussed the problems within virology itself, and the fact that things like avian influenza, H5N1, COVID for that matter, have not been isolated in a lab. And so therefore, not only is looking for antibodies not only moot, they would say, but it's also continuing to spread the government narrative that, you know, things like Omicron and Delta variants are things that you really have to be in fear of. So I'm going to be speaking with some of the virology experts, the doctors who are saying these things, some of the more vocal critics of what goes on at this farm, but I'm also going to speak to, you know, the farm owners themselves and some of the people who are here protesting the cull order from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And I think we can all agree that what the government is doing here is bad. It's absolutely wrong, and we cannot let them set this insane precedence. But there's also a lot to be said about what some of these other people have raised as well. So I hope to help, you know, get to the bottom of all of this, guys. So please stay tuned for my video reports. This is Dan Dicks here reporting for Press for Truth. For the last 5 days, I've been doing research and conducting interviews with some of the people who have their boots on the ground in this fight to save the ostriches. Some of the more vocal critics of the research this farm has been conducting, virology experts who have looked very closely at this particular case, and of course, the farm owners themselves, in order to get the full story directly from the horse's mouth. The family who owns the farm recently released a press release to address some of the controversies. And some of the topics include their background, their antigen research versus vaccination, their farm operations and health history, the COVID-19 antibody research from 2020 to 2021, the Japanese research, the December 2024 to January 2025 health events, the CFIA testing and cull order, legal actions and court outcomes, compensation and fines, and finally, their commitment to transparency. Links for all of this will be located in the description below. So without further ado, here is my video report titled, "This is Universal Ostrich Inc., a deep dive with Press for Truth." Why don't you start off by just telling us what brings you out to Edgewood, British Columbia at this ostrich farm here?
Well, I've been hearing about the ostriches for months now, and the long weekend came, and I figured it was a great opportunity to see what was going on out here. I support the cause. I think it's quite a ludicrous case in a sense after all this time. So I figured I'd come help support and kind of meet the people and kind of see what the vibe is and see if I can lend a hand in any sort of way.
Well, this is my third time here. I came out in the end of January when they first had the cull order. I believe the farm had till February 2nd to pretty much murder their own animals. So that was my first time out here. And that was the first time when I kind of really heard about it. And I just, it was one of those things that I saw it on social media and just was like, I had to come here.
Well, we've been coming for a few months now, since January. A friend told us about it who'd moved to Alberta, and we decided to make the trek out to be supportive that first time in January. And then the following week they were going to be having the cull in February 1st, and so we came out to kind of support again. And since then we just got more and more interested and passionate about the cause.
I'm here because I want to save the ostriches. These ostriches I've been talking to for the last few days, I think they were listening. They seemed to like it when I whistled. And they look healthy, they look happy. It just seems to me wrong to be killing healthy animals. I don't understand that.
So this is on order from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to kill these birds after apparently having influenza, but these appear to be completely healthy, right?
They certainly appear to me, but from what I understand, they've not allowed them to do a proper test.
Look at these things. Yeah. They're well, none have passed. They're laying eggs, they're not stressed. Apparently the males are ready to mate and create young, so these aren't stressed, sick animals. Yeah. They're ready to replicate.
We know that these are healthy birds. I don't have to be a rocket scientist to come out here and realize that after 4 months these are healthy birds. You know, I don't know what scientist is out there who hasn't come out here and said, that one's looking ill. You know, I just haven't seen that presence.
After coming to see these animals and just the thought of a government agency being able to come in and step on, a private citizen's property, and, it's complete government overreach, right? If this happens to me, it's like, where will it stop, right? All you have to do is come down here and see them, and none of them look sick. They're even like they mate still. They're laying eggs. Away from like the fact that it was a PCR test apparently that did it, that we all know are pretty fraudulent.
The PCR test, as you know, the polymerase chain reaction test, it was never designed for finding viruses, and even Kerry Mullis, the inventor himself, said that it can't be used for this sort of thing. It's a method of amplifying a sample to get a result. And the more times you amplify it, the less accurate it is.
It's an amplifier. Right. If I had a small voice and put it through an amplifier, I can make it huge. The same thing with little specks of molecules. You can amplify them to show whatever you want. So, and the creator of the PCR test said, no, you can't use it to prove anything. So let's do some better tests. Come on.
The fact that they haven't even done any more tests than 2 dead birds it's impossible for them to have all the evidence that they would need to be able to make the decision that they are trying to make.
There's no reason to kill healthy animals. I know that some did die, but these ones didn't. And they were all the younger ones, so they hadn't developed an immunity yet to whatever it was. And at this point, we don't actually know what they died of. And just because the name goes out there, N1s and 2s and 5s and whatever, all that business doesn't mean anything unless somebody's done an actual biological test and they can isolate the pathogen. But then looking for a virus, there's a large number of people don't think you could ever find a virus. Right. Because, as Rudolf Steiner told us 100 years ago, what we think is a virus is simply the body's reaction to pathogens and other ingredients that are in our system.
Yeah, there's that speculation too. That virus theory is just a theory.
I don't know the whole history, and I'm not going to argue virus is real, virus is fake debate. That seems to be a big thing. I don't know so much about that. I also did a little bit of research myself around that, and from my understanding, ostrich eggs are healthy for other things, like the yolks and stuff help eczema for kids. And then, of course, people are like, well, how was that caused? You're never going to win, right? So, apparently, like I said, their ostrich oil and stuff is good, super good for you. It's good for eczema. It's good for skin products. It's good for, apparently, even that Japanese company was looking into stuff for cancer. So, I'm not a scientist. I know we do need scientists to find other ways of getting healthy besides big pharma, and to my understanding they could be possible for that. So That's where I think some of, we just need to focus on, right? Like it's still, we need to stay against the people that are not good for us, which is the government and the big pharma and, our food supply. We need to, protect ourselves from that.
Yeah, I would agree. That's the big takeaway here is like the government's going to come and kill 400 healthy birds. Like that's messed up.
That's wrong. And I mean, most of us have pets. So what happens if we don't? I mean, I know my dog's doesn't have his immunizations or whatever. So what happens next if our dogs don't get their shots? Then they're going to get taken away and, and killed. I mean, it's a slippery slope that I don't want to take a chance on letting happen. So I hope some people, the people that are. I mean, I can say come down here. I know it's hard because everyone has lives, but honestly, if you just came down here and had a chat with Katie and Karen and some of the people around here, you'd know that I don't think they have anything against, I don't think they've done anything bad. Mm-hmm. And if they, I don't know if they were, I don't know the whole history, but I honestly, from talking to them, from talking to people, and it's pretty genuine here, and they, I don't think they've intentionally done anything to push the narrative. Did they know? And they weren't freedom fighters. They weren't people. They were just a regular farm here, right? So, I mean, their heads must be kind of, exploding with all the new information they've gotten too, right?
True. Yeah.
So, I mean, we can all say maybe for different things, but I mean, when you come down here, you see the birds, you just kind of forget about all of that.
Those were some very insightful words coming from the people who are actually there. And some of them raised the issues that they have within the field of virology, and in particular, how things like H5N1 bird flu has never been isolated in a lab. To get a better understanding of this important point, I recently spoke with Dr. Andrew Kaufman, who is an American forensic psychiatrist who studied at Duke University Medical Center after graduating from the Medical University of South Carolina. He also has a Bachelor of Science from MIT in molecular biology. All right, so Dr. Kaufman, thank you so much for taking the time to break all this down for us. I know you've been looking into this situation at the Ostrich Farm in Edgewood, BC, in particular some of the research that's been going on there, and I obviously want to get your views on that. But before we get into that, maybe we could start off with this avian bird flu idea in the first place, and perhaps some of the issues that you have within the field of virology itself.
Yeah, well, most people may still be unfamiliar with this subject matter. And, when I was learning about viruses in medical school, of course, I was taught, everything that you've been taught. But what was interesting is that they never really went into the original experiments that discovered the viruses or showed that they could make people sick. In fact, they never even talked about the research with respect to contagion. And it wasn't until, the COVID pandemic that I really examined the scientific experiments that were done to, come up with those ideas and give them, scientific validation. And what I found is that they actually didn't find the evidence to support those ideas of contagion and of viruses causing disease. So it really starts with contagion, and we're told that the reason why they need to cull these animals is because they could pass this bird flu on to other animals, and it could, of course, get the whole food supply sick, and that would be dangerous. But if we look, there have been over 100 published studies, and these include some animal studies, by the way, not in ostriches per se, but in horses and cows. Certainly, because animals do, get flu-like illnesses in a seasonal pattern, just like humans do. But the majority of these over 100 studies were done on humans, and they're all documented, by the way, in a book called Can You Catch a Cold by Daniel Roides, which is available on major platforms like Amazon. And it turns out that none of those studies, and they were all done in a scientific way with a control group, where they tried to take, secretions from people with colds and flu, even the Spanish flu, and expose healthy people to them. They could not reproduce the flu or colds in any of these experiments. So over 100 experiments essentially failed to prove that we actually have contagion of colds and flu through these secretions that are allegedly contain infectious viruses. So we could throw the whole thing out just based on that and say that there's no evidence that any of these animals would actually be contagious. But of course, what was observed at the farm is that numbers of these ostriches were dying, a fraction of the herd, but nevertheless, they reported in one of the articles that they had 4 birds dying a day for a period of time until it stopped. And that, of course, gives the appearance of contagion, but if we can look at the details and ask some questions where we could see that there easily are other possible explanations. And the details here, Dan, were that farmers observed that there were a flock of ducks, wild ducks, that came onto the property and actually took up shelter in the same pen as the ostriches, meaning they had access to the same water supply, for example. Now, ducks are waterfowl, so they live in bodies of water, generally speaking, and that's where their food comes from as well. And we know that many of the bodies of fresh water in North America are polluted, some more heavily than others. There's a lake near where I live called Onondaga Lake, which is heavily polluted to the point that it's not even considered safe to swim in. But you can still find waterfowl on that lake, and they're eating the fish, which are contaminated with these poisons. So another alternative simple explanation could be that the ducks were, before they came to the ostrich farm, they were on a polluted body of water, ate contaminated poisonous fish, then came to the ostrich farm, defecated into their water source. The ostriches drank the water contaminated with feces and poison from the lake, and it killed some of them. And some of them got a higher concentration of these poisons, and those are the ones that died, or maybe they were in poorer health to begin with, so they were more susceptible to the toxic effects of the poison. And I'm not saying there's any evidence available to support that, but they didn't look for that type of an explanation at all. They just assumed that this would be a virus of the avian flu, even though it's not really documented in ostriches per se, but certainly would be possible. But they just didn't look for another alternative explanation, even though you could readily come up with the one that I just articulated. So that could explain why a number of ostriches got sick at the same time. That doesn't involve anything related to contagion or viruses. Now, what happened next is, once they had the observation of these ostriches dying, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency found out about it, and they sent inspectors in, and they did not really do their due diligence. So they didn't approach the situation like, we have to figure out why these animals were dying. They didn't do autopsies, for example, where they looked at the dead birds to say, well, what was the mechanism of death? They just assumed it must be something infectious, and they did a molecular test, right, that they say is for the avian flu. And they only did it on 2 of the carcasses, by the way. Even though they had, more than 10 dead birds, they only picked 2. They didn't give the exact numbers, but it seems like this is a pretty inexpensive test that they could have easily done it on every single bird. But then they risked the finding that maybe not all the birds are positive, even though they all died kind of at the same time. So it was less risky to show that this test is positive by just testing a couple of birds. Now, the test that they used is a PCR, or polymerase chain reaction test, right? And many of us learned what that is during the COVID era, because that was one of the major types of tests used then. And these tests, right, were not given full approval by the government regulatory agency, but they were given an emergency use authorization, which means they could be sold without the company making them having to prove that they actually work. So it's a very profitable way to get your product on the market because an emergency drives demand, and then there's no regulatory scrutiny. You don't have to prove anything, which is difficult, especially when you have a bogus test like this. So with any diagnostic test, the first step that you have to do to show that it actually diagnoses something is called a validation study. And this is where you compare it with the gold standard to show that it measures what the gold standard measures. And so if we were to develop a pregnancy test, for example, the gold standard is that a baby comes out at the end of the pregnancy. And that's, pretty objective, right? We know that that is the gold standard. And so we can do a pregnancy test early on and then wait the rest of the pregnancy and say, does a baby come out? And we can compare the results. And if they agree 90% of the time, that's pretty good. But if it's just flipping a coin, it would still be a 50% agreement, possibly, right? Just by pure chance. So I looked for a validation study for the avian flu PCR test. And I found not just one, more than one paper that was titled validation study. But when I read how it was done, and I knew about this trick because the CDC also did this trick during COVID, they didn't use a gold standard because the gold standard would be comparing it to actually finding a virus in an animal by an electron microscopy of a biopsy of the animal's tissue, for example, and then comparing the test to that. But that was not what was done at all. Instead, what they did was they took a sequence of genetic material that they said was from the avian flu, and they made it synthetically in a laboratory. Actually, there's machines that they use for this, like the DNA and RNA synthesizing machines, where you just add a bunch of chemicals to it, type in the sequence in the computer interface, and it takes hours or days, and then it just spits out this particular sequence. And they compared that as the gold standard. So something that's completely made up. And the problem here is that genetic sequence has never been proven scientifically to actually come from this avian virus. And the reason for that is because they've never actually proven that there is an avian virus. Now, I'll bet that many of the viewers aren't aware that scientists who allege to discover viruses have never ever, in the history of this field, purified a virus in a test tube where you could examine that virus that they, extracted from some organism who was sick and tell what it's made of and tell what the genetic sequences are. They've never even attempted actually to do that. Now, early on in the field of virology, they did attempt that. They were never able to do it. And they just came up with a method that simulates the whole experience. So the only way that they say a genetic sequence is related to a virus is by taking a mixture of animal or human tissue and fluid, and then just basically based on circular reasoning saying there must be a virus in there making that animal sick. And then they look at all the genetic material in that sample, and it's got, human cells in there of various types, bacterial cells, fungal cells, yeast cells. Now, they may filter those things out, but they secrete genetic material into the soup that's with those cells that stays in there. And then they analyze all of the genetic material in there, not knowing what piece is from what organism. And they put it into a computer program and basically do some algorithms on it. And then at the end, just say, here's 1 million possible virus genomes among these sequences. And then they pick one of those out of 1 million and say, that's the virus sequence. And they've never traced it back to find, is that sequence actually in a virus? Because they couldn't do that because they never ever had a virus in a test tube where they could do that kind of an experiment. So they basically have, simulated in a computer model a virus that has never been proven to be in reality. Then they validate a test using synthetic genetic material because they don't have the real thing. And they say, oh yeah, this test is valid. It measures this genetic sequence. The only problem is we have no idea where that genetic sequence comes from or if it even really exists in nature, because the computers assemble these from thousands and thousands of little sequences that they don't even know if they go together or not.
So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is essentially trying to paint the picture here that it is indeed avian influenza bird flu, but you're saying that's essentially impossible to declare because avian bird flu has never been isolated in a test tube.
That's correct. And this is really true of every single virus that they say allegedly causes a disease, not just avian flu. Avian flu just happens to be the popular one now that they're just doing a lot of testing for. And usually when they're recommending the culling of, it's usually chickens and people who raise chickens for food, none of the chickens are actually even sick. Like, this is a unique case that these ostriches actually, some of them did get sick in the first place, but usually it's only the test. So they're just kind of going around and screening these, factory farm chicken facilities for this, genetic sequence that we don't know what it means. And based on their results they're recommending that they kill the herd.
Well, I've heard from the farm owner herself that they would like to conduct some more tests on the healthy birds to prove that they're healthy. And apparently the Canadian Food Inspection Agency will hit them up with like a $25,000 fine if they do dare to test their own birds to try to prove that they are healthy. So doesn't that almost sound like a bit of a cover-up from the CFIA?
Well, look, the courts have already been involved here because the owners of this ranch challenged the culling order from the CFIA, right? And I think the court described it best, and you can find actually quotes from the jurist who issued the decision. They said, one, the court doesn't debate science. They just basically trust whatever the government agencies say. And they pretty much said that outright. And the government agencies, they feel like they're right about this, and they're not interested in debating or listening to outside opinion. And furthermore, also this subject, dragged several months. Originally, it was in January that these ostriches died. And so if not culling that herd of ostriches was going to result in spreading of the avian flu, right, which would be impossible because there's no contagion, but if it were, it would have already occurred, right? And the court is aware of this because this was brought up in the courtroom, and they said it doesn't matter because it's just about you didn't do what Big Brother said, and it could have been dangerous even though it turns out it wasn't. So now you got to go back and do what Big Brother said, even if it doesn't any longer make any sense to do that.
So this is clearly some major overreach by the government, about to kill a bunch of literally healthy birds. This is obviously something very bad that the government is doing, but there's a lot of nuance to this particular story. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes here, and it turns out a lot of people have taken issue with some of the research being conducted at this particular farm, suggesting that looking into antibodies from the ostrich eggs only perpetuates the government narrative that you need to be afraid of Delta and Omicron and COVID-19 and all these sorts of things. So what have you found in terms of some of the things they've been doing? They've linked up with a Japanese famous scientist called Dr. Ostrich, they refer to him as. And so what are your views on the research they're doing into antibodies for viruses that you would suggest don't exist?
Right. Well, this is really an interesting irony of this story, is that the same way that this ranch has made a living is also their downfall. And that's because these birds, are not being raised to be adopted as pets. They're not being raised as food. They're not being raised, to go in the zoo. They are being used for infectious disease research. And apparently this is because ostriches are robust at producing antibodies. And there are several animals, by the way, that are used to produce antibodies both for research and for therapeutics, because there are, pharmaceuticals now that are recombinant antibodies, or not recombinant, but they're, I'm forgetting on the word, but nevertheless, that some of these things are produced in animals. And sometimes this is a useful thing, like, for example, anti-venom for some very poisonous snakes, that they could inject a small amount of the venom into like a sheep or a horse. Those are other animals commonly used for this. Then they can take some blood or some serum with the proteins from that animal and purify out some antibodies that would help neutralize the snake venom. Right? And there is some usefulness to that. So I'm not saying that this type of research is completely useless, but in this case, what they were doing is that they were, as you said, collaborating with a Japanese researcher who was doing COVID vaccine research. And so they were injecting, COVID vaccines, okay, which they say is the dead COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2. And then the ostriches were, of course, making antibodies. And let me I'm going to tell you a little bit more about antibodies in a minute, but I want to just describe what's going on there. And supposedly those antibodies were, effective at neutralizing these alleged virus particles. Okay, and that's what they were trying to develop therapeutic products to, prevent the non-existent contagion, or to treat people who had infection with a non-existent virus. And this is probably very lucrative for the ostrich farm, although I'm not, judging the people or the animals in any way. I don't know them or, what they're like. It was heartwarming that they did describe having an emotional bond with the animals, although they're also poisoning them with COVID vaccines. So there's at least not the best judgment, perhaps. So if we look at antibodies in general, antibodies are proteins that are made by our white blood cells, and they have a pretty interesting structure. And what they do is they bind foreign substances. That could be proteins, small molecules, almost anything. And they are said to bind these foreign substances in a very specific way, that one particular antibody will only bind one substance. And that's how it has been used to be like a diagnostic test, or also used as a therapy. Like there are antibodies that inhibit certain inflammatory molecules in our body, for example, and they block the activity of those inflammatory molecules, and those are used in diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases, for example. Now, they're very dangerous. They have lots of side effects, but that's how they're said to work. But if we go back and examine the research on antibodies, and you could do this by looking at a particular antibody that's said to bind like the avian flu antigen or a COVID antigen, or really anything that it's used for, and look for studies that show that they tested the antibody against a whole bunch of different things and it only bound to that one thing. And you're not going to find this. If you can find in general antibody research the opposite to be true, that a particular antibody, and it's monoclonal antibodies, not recombinant, that's the word I was looking for before, because it's supposed to be just one antibody that's identical and only binds one antigen. But when they've done studies to test this, what they find is that the antibodies actually bind many antigens, not just one. And this is actually a good strategy for our body, because any foreign material that gets inside of us, there's at least going to be one antibody that binds it, because they bind a lot of different things. And that allows it to be sequestered and then be removed from our body so it can't cause us any more harm. So it is a good thing to have antibodies, and they can potentially be therapeutic for that reason, but they don't have the specificity. So when they, say that they've identified this antibody that works for, the COVID virus, that's not really true. It may bind some things that they say are the COVID virus, but it also binds other things.
Well, the family has actually just recently released a press release. They say to deal with some of what they are calling misinformation that's going around in terms of the vaccine use or the antigen use. So maybe I could just read a little bit from this press release and we'll get your response on it. They say, in terms of the antigen research and the vaccinations, in our projects, we used only non-infectious antigens to stimulate antibody production in laying hens' egg yolks while doing research. This is a standard process that is being used in natural avian antibody production. These fragments cannot cause disease. Antibodies are safely harvested from egg yolks without harming the birds. And then they go on to say, under antigen use, Immune Biosolutions provided pre-tested antigens to stimulate antibodies in hens, not roosters. These produced 98% effective at neutralizing antibodies against COVID-19 and its variants, with ostrich antibodies outperforming chicken antibodies by 30 to 40%. So it sounds like they're saying they weren't using any live, active, real vaccines or anything. It's just some sort of synthetic antigens or something like that. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, this research, I couldn't find any publication of it, so I can't tell you exactly what they were using, but I can tell you the general process because, there are many scientific studies where they claim to be using the COVID virus, right, called SARS-CoV-2. But like I said earlier, they've never, ever purified any virus and had it in a test tube. So that's not really what they're using. They're just calling it that based on a lot of assumptions. And the way they produce this is that they have a sick, in this case, because it's avian flu, right, it would be some kind of bird, ostensibly a chicken, who is sick. And then they took lung fluid or a lung biopsy from that chicken who was sick, and they didn't know what the reason why that chicken was sick. And then they took that fluid and they mixed it with a cell culture of a genetically modified cell line that you can buy, commercially, that, you can go on a website and order it, and it has these cells that have been produced. And the most common cells that are used for this purpose in most virus studies are monkey kidney cells from the African green monkey. Now, that doesn't really make sense on the surface because this is supposed to be a disease that infects the lungs, not the kidneys, but this is what they do because those cells can be grown successfully in culture. It's very hard to culture cells of higher animals because, we can't simulate the circulatory system, having, blood coming in and going out to bring nutrients and remove waste products. So that makes it hard to grow these kinds of cells in the laboratory, and they can with these cell lines. But what they do is they just take that lung tissue or lung fluid from the sick bird, mix it with the monkey cells, and add some toxic chemicals and basically make a toxic soup. And they see that the cells in the culture are getting damaged from this toxic soup. And they say, oh, that means this virus is here. And then what they do is they just take the fluid from that cell culture, right? So they filter out the big monkey cells and chicken cells that are in there and just take the fluid, and whatever's in that fluid, they say that that's the virus. But they don't know what's in there. They don't actually examine every constituent in that fluid. They don't show electron microscope images that you can see one, type of virus particle, nothing like that. It's all just based on assumptions and circular reasoning. Now, in order to say that that would be dead or inactivated, then what they would do a number of different things. They might dilute it with some other kind of fluid like phosphate buffered solution. They may expose it to radiation, which supposedly kills it. Now, of course, radiation would affect whatever's in that fluid because it can induce, chemical reactions. They might use a toxic chemical to mix with it to make sure that nothing could survive in there. So when they say they're using these, inactivated or dead antigens, most likely it's just that soup from the cell culture with something else added into it that would just kill anything that's in there. And what they're trying to do is reassure you that they're not going to cause, an outbreak by doing these experiments. But as I explained earlier, contagion has never been proven. In fact, it's been disproven through over 100 different experiments with respect to the flu. Now, did they test avian flu specifically? No, but it's essentially the same thing that they tested in other animals and in humans. So there's really no chance of that happening. But what this is right, it's for the purpose of developing therapeutics, right, for COVID, which is, based on an infection with a virus that actually doesn't exist, only as a simulation. And so there's no chance of anything good coming out of this research, is what I'm trying to say. It's really a wasted effort, but it goes a long way to keep up the appearance that this is a real threat to our health and to our food supply, when in fact there are other much more nefarious motivations that are driving this whole industry. And I think also you can expect that we will not see any products on the market based on these ostrich antibodies, because there's no way they could actually be effective.
Wow. Man, this whole thing is so nuanced. There's so many angles to this story. It's absolutely phenomenal. But essentially, this virus not being isolated and the contagion not being a thing essentially makes the research moot, and therefore it's perpetuating the government narrative that you got to be afraid of these things. Meanwhile, they are still going to go in and potentially cull these 400 healthy birds, and it could be, the launch of a precedent-setting case that's going to be an attack on small-time farmers moving forward. Because if they could go for those birds, maybe they could go for cows and horses and eventually people's pets, in their own homes eventually. So
Right.
who knows what kind of a precedent this case is setting.
Dan, they already are doing this to some degree, maybe not as much in Canada, but they are in the US and in some European countries, where they're not just culling chicken flocks and herds, but they've said that now it's spread to dairy cows. And so there have been some culling of dairy cows, as a result, and which also just on the surface doesn't make sense, because they call it an avian flu, which refers to birds, not cows. Right, but pretty much because of the way that this PCR test is not validated, and the nature of the PCR technology can show many, many false positives. So you could basically design this test such that whatever you tested, whether it be any kind of animal, a human, or even something non-biological, right? And this was demonstrated during COVID many times, like by testing a puddle of water or a piece of fruit, things like that, you can get a positive result. And that then leads to policies, right, of that you can't raise these animals, they're unsafe, it creates fear, it diminishes the food supply. And, one thing I wanted to say is all of this is actually under contract. So all these farmers and ranchers, in order to get their licensing and permits, they essentially entered into a contract where they gave permission to these government agencies to come in and do that, and that they would cooperate with whatever order. So if you're a small farmer or food producer and you want to avoid this, you want to do your operations completely in the private, where you don't enter into these contracts and you don't allow any inspectors to come into your operation. And that's really the only way to avoid this, because this is an ongoing operation, in my opinion, and it's part of a bigger agenda, which is known as Codex Alimentarius.
Wow, like honestly, very, very good point there. I think, obviously we're having some major problems with the government coming in and doing this, and they shouldn't be allowed to do this. However, it's, as you said, because the farm owners themselves engaged in the the contracting with the government rather than being on the private side is why they have to deal with this in the first place. So had they not contracted with them, they may be able to have avoided this whole thing. But I guess at the end of the day, what the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Canadian government here is doing is wrong. It's bad, and it as you said could have been avoided. So yeah, thank you so much for raising that very important point.
Well, Dan, it's no different than almost all government policies that are not really in our interest as we, the people. It's in the interest of, the elite leaders as well as the big monopolistic corporations.
Once again, very insightful words coming from Dr. Andrew Kaufman. If you'd like to learn more from him, you can check him out at andrewkaufmanmd.com. Next, we'll turn to one of the more vocal critics of Universal Ostrich Farms, Inc., and that is Christine Massey. She is a former biostatistician who famously filed multiple Freedom of Information Act requests to the likes of the CDC and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, requesting scientific proof of the existence of any alleged virus that they claim has ever affected livestock in Canada, to which they replied, "We have been assured by responsible officials of the agency that no documents exist concerning the requested information."
First thing I'd like to point out, something that's what I have observed in this, there's a lot of attention on this ostrich story. And what is getting missed, not getting mentioned from what I've heard by their team, and is mostly getting left out of the story, is we often hear, oh, if these ostriches are culled, then they're going to go after the chickens and, and all hell is going to break loose. Well, of course, that's a concern. But what people need to understand is that culling of animals is not new. This has been going on for years and years. Like, I don't know when they first started doing it, but it's not remotely new. So like my colleagues and I who are pointing out the problems with virology, this is one of the things that we've been pointing to and saying, they kill huge numbers of animals under the premise of a virus when the virus isn't even shown to exist, and nobody has ever demonstrated contagion of symptoms. So this is one thing that I really want to get across to people, is like, this is not a new situation. And according to news reports, in British Columbia alone, since the spring of 2022, 8.7 million birds were already culled under this avian influenza narrative. In the last year or two, according to news reports, over 100 million birds have been killed in the US. You might remember a few months ago, in some areas, they were having egg shortages and the egg prices were skyrocketing in the US. And of course, they've culled other types of animals as well. So, and there's concerns that they'll eventually cull cows, pigs, who knows. So yeah, there's definitely, I share the concern that this culling phenomenon might become more and more common, but it's definitely not something new, and it's already been going on in BC. So I think that's something that deserves a lot more attention.
Right. The culling is based on the fact that it's based on the fact that they're saying that these chickens, backyard farm chickens and whatever, are sick with this thing that they haven't even proved it exists. And the culling has been happening and continues to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and what typically happens, and what has happened with the ostrich farm, is that if they just get one positive result on their fraudulent, meaningless tests that don't test for a virus, and even if a virus had been shown to exist, these tests couldn't confirm that there's a virus, because it's always indirect evidence that they're looking at. That's the whole nature of a test. If they get even one positive result, well, that's it. The whole thing, the whole herd is, dangerous, apparently. So this is my mind's going off in different directions. But one thing for farmers to be aware of is, like, letting these people on your farm and getting started with any testing in the first place. That's, you're kind of inviting them to potentially destroy your whole livelihood and all your animals. So to that end, I actually have a resource. I want to make sure at some point I have to remember to mention this. We have an important resource for farmers. But yeah, that's the whole thing. It's just their story is there's this dangerous health threat. If one of them gets it, well, it could have spread to all of them, and they might not even be showing symptoms. And well, we just can't take the risk and we have these obligations. We can't have it spreading to other farms and God forbid it infects people and the trade concerns and so on, right? So it all comes back down to this idea that there's this dangerous little particle that replicates, it gets inside cells, it hijacks, it replicates, and it spreads from person to person or animal to animal. And this is a serious health threat, and it's not been shown to be true. So yeah, if you don't have the agent, and you can't even ever show that there's contagion of symptoms, like they have absolutely nothing. So that's why people need to know this and not go along with, be very cautious about letting them on your farm and learn about ways that you can talk to them and deal with them. And I'll share a resource later too.
So you're essentially trying to hack at the root of the problem, which is this concept that they have to stop these viral, diseases from spreading. Whereas the issue, if I'm not mistaken, is the ostrich farm's position on the research is essentially continuing to permeate this idea into the minds of the masses that these viruses are indeed something to be concerned with, and your farm should be concerned with them. Yeah. Is that kind of the issue we're dealing with?
Yeah, that's why there's been quite a bit of trauma, especially in the last few days, and there is like sort of a division coming in, and it's not coming from ill will. It's just different people have different bodies of knowledge. Some, and I understand these people, they're farmers. That's their background, is looking after animals. And like most of people, including myself, until 5 years ago, I just happened to come across a video by Dr. Andrew Kaufman. So that's how I started learning. But most of us, we go throughout our lives, we're taught our whole lives. It's drilled into us that there's germs, there's bacteria, but, they're not shown to be pathogenic. But we're told these stories and then we interpret everything in light of that. So I understand farmers, even doctors and nurses and so-called scientists weren't questioning this narrative. So why would farmers, right? So from what I understand, from what they've said, and it's in their court documentation, they were doing other things, like there was some meat processing, there was some use of oils from the animals for cosmetics, and having people visit the farm and educate them about ostriches. And then the COVID hoax began, another hoax. And because of that, their operations were shut down. And then they started learning about this researcher in Japan, Dr. Tsukamoto, so-called scientist. But, unfortunately, I don't know if this man understands what he's doing or not, but he's not a scientist, he's a pseudoscientist. He's not conducting scientific experiments, but I'm sure they're told that they're scientific. And now guess what? Ostriches have these powerful antibodies, and they're thinking, well, we need something else to do with our ostriches. Why wouldn't they do that if you think it's going to help the world, right? So unfortunately, that's where they're stuck, and now that's their business model that they're very much invested in. And there's then other people like myself saying, hang on a minute, like that's not true. And you're propagating it and you're asking for all this attention and all this support. But almost every video, you're propagating what we know is a dangerous myth. So some of us are kind of like going, hang on a minute, not so fast. Where's your evidence? So if people go to my Substack, and they go to that, if they just type in don't fall for the avian influenza virus hoax, if they find that newsletter, that's where I keep updating it every time I get a new response on avian influenza virus. And there's some important resources linked to that. So the first thing is I have a link that goes to my friend Linda Morkin's Substack, because she has posted a resource that I think is really good for farmers to have on hand. It'd be a good idea for them to print it out right away, and it might give them like some comfort. So it's designed so that if someone from Canadian Food Inspection Agency or someone from, in another country, they have some inspectors want to come and take samples from their birds. I mean, you have the whole thing around, challenging their authority to do that, right? But without going into that part right now, it's a form where they have to clearly identify themselves, but also it's saying no samples will be released until you provide or cite the valid, rigorous scientific studies that show that the alleged virus exists, show contagion, show that these tests are validated, which exact tests are you planning to do, and details about the tests, right? So it's designed in a way so that you're being polite, you're being cooperative. Like you can kind of approach it like you're bargaining with someone. You don't just necessarily tell them to bugger off. You might, some people might choose to do that, but some people, you might be scared too. But you're saying basically, okay, I'll cooperate, or I'll consider cooperating as soon as you provide me all of this evidence. And we know they don't have it. They won't be able to provide it.
Right.
So it's a way of putting, hopefully, and I have to give credit to Sally Fallon Morrill in the US. She's with the Weston Price Foundation. She started this designing the questionnaire last year. I helped a little bit with it. And then Linda Morkin finessed it, and that's her version that we have there. So I think it's a good thing for farmers should just print it out and keep it by their door, or keep some in their car. And all ready to go if someone shows up.
Had these farmers in Edgewood had have said, hey, we understand your concern, but if you're going to want to do this, we're going to need you to provide some proof that the thing you're talking about exists in the first place. And unless you can provide that, we're not going to let you in, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I have kind of wondered if they were targeted because it was known that now what they've been doing for the last 5 years since COVID, they've been doing this research shows that their business model depends on this whole virus narrative. So they're going to be less likely than other farmers to say, well, hang on a minute, right? So it might be partly why they were targeted. I was making the point just that there's a narrative that what the farmers are doing are this big threat to big pharma because it's like an alternative to so-called vaccines. But the way I look at it, it's like they're still working within that germ model. And, the people that run these hoaxes, they know not everyone's going to go for a so-called vaccine. So they want alternatives like ivermectin or other things, antibody cures, that supposedly are going to help people. And, I don't know, I haven't found a study where they're actually testing these antibodies to see how they actually affect anyone's health. So I'm not saying I know for a fact that they're going to hurt people, but that's obviously the concern that, they're spraying stuff up people's noses, foreign particles, that who knows what might go wrong, right? And then one thing I want to mention too is like, one of the things that these farmers have been saying, because they believe in the virus and contagion, I think they've been shooting themselves in the foot for number one, going along with this whole narrative. But number two, like part of their complaint has been, well, the only tests that were conducted were on 2 dead birds, right? Now I know the tests aren't valid anyway. It doesn't matter how many you test or what results you get. But they've been saying, it was only 2 dead birds. This is ridiculous. We have these hundreds of other birds still alive and they weren't even tested. But at the same time, they're shooting themselves in the foot by saying, yes, they were infected and now they've recovered and now they have antibodies. And we just know because we just know that there was a virus. The wild birds brought it. They pooped on our property. The wild birds are the problem. And that's how we know that, our ostriches have antibodies to avian influenza virus. So they're shooting themselves in the foot by volunteering this narrative that, these birds were infected. Well, anyone who believes that, they're going to worry, well, what if they still have some virus lingering in their bodies? Like, if you believe in viruses and contagion, it's, kind of a valid concern because people believe they can be kind of dormant for a while, or, they come up with all kinds of kooky narratives to keep their pseudoscience going. So, and because they believe this, and they're saying, well, you're going after our ostriches. Meanwhile, there's all these wild birds going around and you're not stopping them. And there's kind of a valid point there, right? But it's a problem because number one, it's not true. There isn't a virus. There isn't demonstrated contagion. And they have actually said that they want to target the flight paths of migratory birds. so I presume they mean with their antibody cure that they think they have. And I don't know exactly what this would look like, but it sounds like they in some way want to target wild animals. And I don't think wild animals need us messing around with them like that, and especially for a totally unproven, narrative. So that's something I'm concerned, and I really hope they'll reconsider, and take a hard look. I know it can't be easy when you've pivoted and you did all this work to go a new direction with your business, and now you're like, oh, we have this amazing cure for humanity, and it's probably pretty lucrative. And then you have people start telling you, no. So I get it. I know they're in a difficult space, but the whole thing is, if we need a course correction for the entire world so that we stop all this death and destruction of millions and millions and millions, countless millions of animals and people throughout our lives, right? Like, we need that to end. And that's why people like myself who learned about the pseudoscience were so vigorous in pointing it out and trying to encourage a course correction.
Right. Right. So your intention is to kind of, stop this lie, this narrative of the virus, of the contagion, so that we can get to a point of saving small-time farmers, really. So
Exactly.
it is to help the farmers,
It's to harm to me, it's the most powerful thing. Why do you want to argue we want more tests? The tests aren't even valid. What if you get another positive result? That's all it takes is one. That's
Right.
all it takes is one. And they go, see, we told you. Maybe they'll get lucky and they get all negative, right? And then the dump will say, okay, well, now we're confident. We don't mind taking them because our water's not going to get contaminated. I don't know, but it's not helping to correct the misinformation in this,
Right.
extremely damaging narrative. So that's what we're trying to do, is help them. Like, it would be so great, because they have been saying all along, that Karen Esperin, the lady farmer, always had this feeling that the farmers are going to do something special for humanity. And I think that potential is still 100% there. It's just going to look completely different. They're going to end up helping more people be exposed to the problems with virology and the greater germ model. And they can end up being an incredible, but it would be so much easier if they would take a look and understand, and their supporters start going in that direction instead. And then we can just put all this insanity behind us.
Yeah, unfortunately, it has become a rather decisive issue. It's dividing people, but really, there's multiple. It's very nuanced. There's a lot of things going on to this, and I would have to agree. Not allowing to contract with the government to allow them to come in and kill your healthy farm animals in the first place is an important way to go. And we also have to educate people about the fact that they haven't answered your Freedom of Information Act requests and haven't been able to provide any proof of these things in the first place. So these are all things that need to be considered moving forward on this highly contentious issue. So I guess if just to wrap it up, I mean, considering it has been, a highly contentious issue and kind of divided the movement, essentially, do you have any kind of words of advice or encouragement or things that you want to leave people with thinking about moving forward?
I look, the way I look at it, it has been, like I've been so focused on it these last few days. I don't usually pay that much attention to the ostrich story, but I just got wrapped up in it. And then, when people are kind of pushing back, and I get caught up in it myself, right? But the way I look at it, it can be unpleasant at times, but I look at it as like growing pains for humanity. Like, this is just how it is when people have different points of view and there's a lot at stake. People argue and we get pissed off at each other, right? But I do think most people are in it with good intentions, and this is just one of those things that we're going through, and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
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 Just
Well
use the
said.
resources and take a look. Be willing to take a look and question your assumptions and your conditioning, and focus on what's true and what you can. And I think one advice for them, like, they want unity, they want support. They've invited attention, they've invited support, donations, come to our farm, but they don't want to answer the hard questions and they don't want things being pointed out. So my suggestion would be, if you want more unity, you want things to be more harmonious, stop all the narrative that you can't prove focus on the verifiable facts. You have healthy birds. The tests are bullshit. There's no evidence for this narrative, and just know, like, this is our private property. You're not going to steal and destroy our private property, and you'll be a party to theft and fraud and animal cruelty if you do. I think that would be a much more powerful way to go, and I wish them all the best. I really do.
So once again, that was Christine Massey. Be sure to subscribe to her Substack. I will put links to everything in the description below. But now it's time we go directly to the source. Katie Pasitny is the daughter of the farm owner, Karen Esperson, and she agreed to speak with me very openly for the sake of transparency to break down the whole situation and to address some of the controversies surrounding their farm. All right, we made it. We're finally here with Katie. Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to break this all down for us. I mean, this has been a very big situation for you. Where would you track this back to? How did this all start for you guys?
How did this all start? So we had symptoms in our animals in later December of 2024. I'm going to speed backwards a bit because in 2020 we had these same symptoms, so they didn't alarm us very much. We knew that these, when we had these symptoms back in 2020, we went to our vet. They did a golden standard sample, a tissue sample, came back positive for a Pseudomonas bacteria. We had 10 birds on our farm die then, at about 300, and then they recovered. Never looked back. Everybody was been good. Then December 2024, we had symptoms, represented themselves just like those ones. Contacted our vet, and they it's kind of through the holidays, so we were just waiting to hear back. Then we received an anonymous tip that somebody said to Canadian Food Inspection Agency that we were sure we had avian influenza. At that time, we expressed to them and talked to them about how the symptoms that we had some that were sick but then recovering. We did have deaths. This is nothing hidden. We had at the very end of this, in total is 69 deaths. We expressed to them our whole story, told them everything that we were working on here about the antibodies and the research, offering a natural solution to the virus that had been going around. They showed extreme interest in our work. On January 2nd, we got an email saying that we qualify for special rare genetics. January 2nd, we also had a 5.5-hour interview with Canadian Food Inspection Agency disclosing they wanted all of our research, all of our papers, all of our documents, our business plan, everything that we had. Then we gave all that to them about the 5-hour mark. We said, are you just probing us for information and you're not interested in working with us, or you've decided to kill our animals? And they said, no, we are absolutely interested in your research here. So we found out through our legal, as we go speed forward, that they already signed our cull order December 31st. So it was kind of shocking to know that we asked them, did they already sign the cull order? They said no. When they came here to inspect, they asked us to have when we had 2 deceased animals. So when we had 2 deceased animals, they said, we'd like to test them. We said, absolutely no problem. Definitely didn't know it was going to be a controversial PCR test that was going to be ran on both deceased animals. Both of those deceased animals were there for about 16 to 18 hours dead. They had been for quite a while. They did an oral and a rectal swab on both. At the time, we asked them, could we test all of our healthy animals, which was more than half of our farm. More than half of our farm did not present any symptoms, and there was no deaths. This, and now along the legal journey, we found out this is because we tested their egg yolk, which we had stored from years ago, and their egg yolk came back positive for H5N1 antibodies. So kind of a little bit back and forth there, but that is a very important part of the story. So they had herd immunity. They had immunity to this. All of the ostriches that were on our farm after 2000 are the ones who were going through gaining their immunity. Their immune systems were challenging it. Some were getting sick, some were getting better, and then we also had losses. So it wasn't shocking to us. When you have a farm and you're the experts in your field, when you have livestock, you have dead stock. You treat them the best you can. You already quarantine them away from others because you don't want this to spread. Those PCR tests, anyways, they got ran at very high cycles. We'll just say over 35. And so we were denied the testing on our other animals. They only took those 2. They left, and the whole story has just from now that January 2nd Zoom call, and when we tried to plead our case for our research here and what we're trying to do, we also got an exemption package. The exemption package was a Unit 1 distinct unit package, exemption package. That package was designed for commercial poultry. It was a commercial poultry facility exemption package, which we are not. We are not for food consumption. Have we been in the past? 100%. These animals are great. They have healthy red meat that's lean and great for diabetics. They can eat it. Their oil is amazing in curing things with rosacea, eczema, and different ailments for the human body. So those were our main focus prior to COVID-19. Now that we had deviated our research and everything to the antibody program, we were pleading our case. Like we said, we're not for food consumption anymore. We never have. We were never, it's not even in big stores or anything like that. So going off that, we looked at this Unit 1 distinct exemption package and said it actually says in here it's for turkeys, geese, ducks, and chickens. There's not ostrich, there's not a rhea, there's not an emu on here. So we don't know how we can answer this package and give ourselves the best chance at this exemption possible. So we phoned our caseworker and said we cannot answer these questions accurately. This is not an exemption package for our farm. We are not going to have the good chance of being qualify for being exempt. And she said, no, you have to fill out this exemption package. So she said, even if you answer no to a bunch of the questions, if you don't answer these questions, you will be non-compliant and you will not be qualified. So we filled it out to our best ability, and we just took a big gulp when we did it because we're like, we have to answer no to basically everything. It was very misleading now looking back because it was not the appropriate package for our farm. January 10th, by golly, we get a letter saying that we have to cull our animals. They're set to be killed. They have to be killed by February 1st. If they are not, so it was actually at that time, so, if we have this really bad virus here, they were going to put it in our hands for 21 days. And we were supposed to kill our own animals. We were supposed to dispose of our own animals. So it's funny looking where we've come now, looking backwards, that we were the experts then in handling this virus and dealing with it. But obviously compliance in that matter was not even an option for us. We're so much more to us with the decades of genetics and the decades of beautiful, big animals that are our oldest bird being here 35 years old. So we were not in compliance. We fought to find a lawyer. January 16th, we found a lawyer. He went to bat for us and he fought really hard. January 31st, right before February 1st, when they were going to move in and they were going to hire a vendor to come and kill our animals, we won an injunction, which was a stay order. We won that right to the appeal or a judicial review. When that happened, Justice Batista found that this was going to cause irreparable harm and damage to 2 livelihoods. We were not being properly or fairly given the different options within the policy. They right away jumped to the stamping out, and he got attacked himself by Canadian Food Inspection Agency, saying he erred in law, he erred in principle, and he overstepped his jurisdiction as a federal court judge. After that, we had to prepare for our judicial review, which was April 15th and 16th. April 15th and 16th, we fought two discussion points. One was the December 31st cull date. Was it right for them to sign that cull order without the lab results had not even went yet to the Winnipeg lab, which is the lab that it can actually diagnose H5N1. So we were fighting that, if they had the foresight to look to see if these were going to recover and look at the animals that had not even gotten sick yet, that they wouldn't assign that. If they would have given us the option to have a monitor, stay quarantined and retest, we would have seen these animals recover. The other point was we had the December 31st call date, and we were challenging the exemption package. So here we are. We lost on. We didn't lose, but they were dismissed. So both of those points that we tried to represent or to fight for were dismissed by Judge Zinn. And he's really just putting it back on the experts, which he sees, right, as the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and saying that there's still a public health risk. During this whole time, we have asked for one thing, and we've asked for the right to test our own animals to prove to the world that we pose no public health risk. Our animals are healed, they're happy, they're doing well. We have been met with nothing but resistance. We are being threatened 6 months in jail, a penalty of 6 months in jail and a $200,000 fine if we test our own animals. In that policy, in the quarantine penalties, you're not even allowed to treat your own animals. Now, you look at all of us farmers and go, we're the experts with our animals. So you're telling us we're supposed to now stop treating our own animals, caring for them. We're supposed to make them suffer. And especially in a unique situation like this, because we're not poultry, we're not chickens. So it's not like you have the big barn of 20 or 30,000 chickens that are dead in 24 hours. We have an outdoor flock that does not fly. They are exposed to migratory birds, which we think brought whatever it was in. As long as we have migratory birds in the world, nowhere in the world is going to be avian influenza free. So how is eradicating and killing off all of our livestock across the world, losing our genetic diversity, putting our food security at risk, losing our farmers because they don't want to keep repopulating? You tell me how that is the solution. It is not the solution.
It almost seems like the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has been deliberately doing shady things here, bureaucratic red tape stuff, like giving you the incorrect forms or just, the massive runaround. And now you're just trying to prove that these things are healthy so they don't kill them, and they're the ones pulling the trigger.
This is it. We found out, so we have so many people that are supporting us around the world, and I want to thank everybody. But we found out from a person that the Udachenia landfill up in the Kootenay boundary got the contract, or approached about the contract for our animals. That all of a sudden ignited a huge firestorm, because how can now you have these diseased animals and they're going into landfills, especially such a large amount? Who's handling these animals, the transportation of these animals, who's killing these animals? Canadian Food Inspection Agency doesn't show up on site to kill them. They hire a vendor. So are they reputable? What are their backgrounds? Do they have the right expertise to handle these animals? We speed up to that in the landfill, find out through the process that the landfill was contacted in November. Remember that we got our illness in December. They were contacted in November about could they handle large volume of deceased carcasses or of carcasses. So that's alarming. There was a huge road trip adventure up to Nelson to try to make it up to the RDCK meeting, which is the regional district of the Kootenays. They were having a board meeting on this topic, and I got there just at their last question and was able to represent the farm and say, please take off your suit jackets and be human for a minute. These animals are happy and healthy. They have herd immunity, natural immunity. They've been healthy for over 120 days since January 14th. So we said all we're asking for is the right to retest them, not with a PCR test, the controversial PCR test, but our gold standard testing with our own vets and do our own procedures handled absolutely appropriately, that how they would have handled them. And we're just being consistently met with resistance. So at the end of the meeting for the RDCK, they put forth a motion. That motion was to pass that they want sufficient evidence, new evidence, from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that these animals have been retested and that they are still sick, because they don't want to accept healthy animals either into their landfill.
And the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is dealing with this when they're not even consumption birds, they're research birds. How does that make any sense?
I know, and there's that's a whole nother hot topic right now. We're doing a press release later, just from our family, with the most accurate information of exactly what we've been doing here. Because as we've had 5 months for a lot of these people to come out of the woodwork and really, to come after what we've been doing. But now the bigger that the case has gone, we see a lot of people coming out with all of their own theories, and that we've vaccinated them and that's why they're sick, and we have mRNA technology, or we don't. And it doesn't make any sense either then if it was the hens. Like, we had deceased animals in our roosters and our hens. Our hens are the only ones that we work with a natural antigen to create an immune response, a natural antibody response to collect. 4 weeks later, the antibodies go down into the egg. We can extract those antibodies from the egg. No harm in the animal, but it doesn't make sense. The hens should just die, right? They would have just died if it was something to that effect. But we were losing our roosters and hens. There was something going on. So now that we have our herd immunity, and these animals have been happy and healthy, and we're still being resisted that we can't test. It's we're just in a fight for our lives. But now we're seeing so many other groups and everybody kind of attacking each other, and that's not why we're here. Like, this is, we honor that every group is going to have their own beliefs. Every group, I'm not challenging germ theory or anything like that. I'm actually very open to learning about all of it. But what we want here, and our message to stay clear, is everybody coming unified, fighting for the same cause, which is the stamping out policy is not working on a global scale. We are losing our farmers, we're losing our food. We're getting through very challenged times, and we need to start to come together. We need to hold these big organizations like Canadian Food Inspection Agency accountable.
Yeah, that's the crux of the matter. I mean, I have heard similar things going around. It has become a rather contentious, kind of dividing issue over the research side. And I have heard, I'm glad you brought up the germ theory, because I've heard people saying if these haven't been isolated in a lab, then some would ask, is it moot to look for antibodies for a virus that doesn't exist? Or are you now perpetuating the government fear when it comes to viruses? I think that's some of the concerns I've heard.
Yeah. And remember this too. So they want to take away our healthy immune animals that have a natural immunity. They've been here for decades. They're strong. They've overcome environmental challenges in their immune system that we'll never know. You go to the store and you pay for something, and then you eat something. You go eat chips. You're gaining, who knows what germs you're getting inside your body, but your body is creating a natural immunity. If you don't get sick, it's always working at firing off, whatever we have inside us. We're fighting for natural immunity. We're fighting for best immunity, which is herd immunity, that is in humans and animal welfare. We have science here that is natural, that we're it's pushing back on vaccinations. If we all had natural antibodies and we had robust antibodies that was making us healthy, we wouldn't need the vaccinations as much. We wouldn't be relying on pills as much. We wouldn't need the Tylenol as much. But so that, I think we're just now putting ourselves at odds, obviously, as being, we're at odds with someone like Big Pharma now, right? So some of these organizations that are paid off, and, it can go on, but we just need to keep the focus that we're trying to bring everybody unified, keep our heroes, which are our farmers. They've been they've been a backbone to Canada, and all around the world, providing nutritional food security for your families, your kids, for the generations to come. We're losing them because the repopulating is hard. You're seeing, we're killing the survivors as well. And that is, we need to stop it. The survivors are the ones that we protect, and we should be making them the golden animal. We should be breeding off those animals.
Well, it almost seems like a potentially precedent-setting case where if they can go after small-time ostrich farmers, what's to stop them from going after cows or horses or maybe pets eventually down the road, right? I'm sure you've heard that argument.
Absolutely, and especially with the most inaccurate testing and resistance to retest. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to stay away from that, and we need to come together at this time, not divide.
The division is happening a lot online, I'm finding. Yeah.
And that's okay. I just keep saying, I mean, we've had 5 months. You can come on the train, you can get off the train, it's okay.
Yeah.
But here, our message is clear in what we're fighting for, and we're fighting to save our farmers, keep them the heroes. Like through COVID-19, we had the fallen heroes of the frontline workers, and we had the trucker convoy and our truckers. They were all heroes and then villainized.
Right.
And we can't let that, they're all heroes still. Like they are all heroes, and they were heroes, and they are heroes. And we cannot let our farmers become villainized. So let's not make the same mistake again. Let's protect our farms. Let's unite. Let's come up with different, or a different organization or a platform where farmers can start to feel safe and that they are getting seen and heard, but protected. Because farmers are saying, so if an anonymous tip comes in, my animals could all be gone. But then if you go further into the policy, you don't even need a positive test for them to kill all your animals. They can kill all your animals based on a suspicion. Right. They have full authority to come and kill all your animals.
Right, and I that's the big takeaway here, from this. And I would agree. It's people are getting caught up in did they receive grants? Did they work?
Yes, no. Please come visit.
I keep hearing the $13 million
farm. Please come visit the farm. If we had $13 million grants and stuff, our farm would look a little different. Yeah. There was a gentleman out of a lab that we were working with that we actually have all the science to show that we have our antibodies out of our ostrich egg, which one ostrich egg is equivalent to the same of 100 chicken eggs worth of antibodies in one egg. We use chicken antibodies all the time. Yeah. And so I say to everybody, we have the scientific research to show that there was a gentleman that wanted to test our ostrich eggs. We were able to prove that our ostrich eggs antibodies were actually able to neutralize the COVID-19 variant, not block it. It was groundbreaking research. He got a grant to work on that. He received a grant, not our farm. Right. And then when he received all that really amazing information, his lab was bought out and he signed a non-disclosure agreement, and he wasn't allowed to talk to us anymore. Okay. So, right. I mean, there's a lot of stories circulating. You're going to get a lot of accurate information out of a press release from our family, but we've never been money driven or anything like that. Otherwise, you would see, I mean, we would have been like, oh, compensation. Okay, we'll just take the compensation or repopulate but we're not like that. There is no compensation.
Prominent people on Twitter right now are tweeting at me today saying there's companies, they're breaking down the ostriches and selling them for skin cream products and pet food or whatever, and it's just all about making money. And I said, you got to ask them about this. So
let's talk about that for sure, because absolutely, did we make skin cream products before COVID-19? Yes. Did I try a pet line? Absolutely. These animals have a key to healing all other animals and healing humans. So we were very invested in helping other animals. We had dogs and stuff just taking the oil of an ostrich, and they were fully off antihistamines. Hot spots were growing back in, all natural. They were off drugs, and they were able to take a natural pet oil from our ostrich. Again, it's natural. So people all go up in arms and they want, less big pharma, but then you come up with something natural and then they want to attack the natural. Right. Where's the happy medium, right? You're always going to have people that aren't happy, and our family and our farm respects those people. We're not here to waste valuable time to protect our farmers and our ag industry and our food security, as well as our livestock around the world that are getting unnecessarily killed, to combat and debate and fight. Let's fight later about, if you guys want to get into a good topic or something, that's okay.
And you've even said, look, I'm learning to learn about virology and all this stuff, but right now they're trying to kill our birds.
That's it. Let's keep these ostriches alive. I don't think any of those groups want to see these animals killed. And that's what our focus has to be on here is there's a complete government overreach that has this government organization has no accountability with too much power. We have the support of MPs, Scott Anderson. We had Mel Arnold will be here tomorrow. We have MLAs. We made it to the legislature, had a meeting with Lana Poppin, Steve Morissette. We have David Eby has spoke out on this. It's so important. He said he's frustrated that they will not work with us to find an exemption or work with us to come up with a different solution. And so we are actually seeing all of our politics, conservatives, liberal, independents, are all coming together saying, stop.
Yeah.
When do we see all of our politicians actually agree on something?
True.
So I think we should harness that here and say, maybe if they can all come together on this and they can agree on something, maybe we should too. And let's put our differences aside, come and be unified here in this journey, in this fight that we're in.
Very well said. Yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up, and hopefully this will help do the same for everybody online who has any issues with what's going on here. So, yeah, thanks so much for that. Any final thoughts on this whole thing?
Final thoughts. It's just been a really big journey. Thank you for coming. Mainstream media, independent media, everybody has been fantastic trying to cover this because everybody's heart is in the right place. They want to see these animals survive. People are really getting the bigger picture that these ostriches became the perfect catalyst to change. Yeah. And the world is watching, and we have a massive opportunity here. Let's not shadow that. And let's use this opportunity to go protect all the other animals, our food security, our farmers, which are our heroes. And let's come together and stay together, united, and let's have debates later.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
There you have it, folks, directly from the source. But make no mistake about it. This isn't about just one farm. This is an ongoing battle. And I think there was one key point that was raised a number of times, and I think it needs to be addressed again. If you're a farmer and you don't want to deal with similar things, you have to remain in the private by having no contracts with these government agencies, and you cannot agree to their requests or their orders. In my estimation, here's the exact moment that everything went wrong for Universal Ostrich Farms.
When they came here to inspect, they asked us to have when we had two deceased animals. So when we had two deceased animals, they said we'd like to test them. We said absolutely no problem.
And there it is. They agreed to let the agency do the test. According to their press release, following an anonymous tip on December 28, 2024, CFIA called the farm and agreed, based on symptoms, this did not sound like avian influenza. CFIA then told the farm to call when they had two carcasses available for testing. On December 29th, the farm called CFIA as there were two more deaths. CFIA tested the two carcasses on December 30th, 2024, with preliminary H5 results from an internal self-regulated CFIA Ministry of Agriculture lab in Abbotsford, BC. A call order was signed and issued 41 minutes after the PCR test results were known, before N1 confirmation from the Winnipeg internal self-regulated CFIA lab results were known on January 10th, 2025. No details of the testing, handling, and shipment of the test samples have been disclosed, even upon multiple requests by the farm. This chain of custody is normally provided to ensure proper procedures are followed to avoid flawed results. Additionally, CFIA orders state that no testing, including third-party testing, can be done. In fact, the farm is under order that they cannot treat or test their own animals, which the farm normally does themselves. Independent gold standard tissue testing and any other testing of any kind is prohibited, with threats of $200,000 in fines or 6 months in jail for conducting our own tests, as per Health of Animals Act Section 66B. Thus, only PCR testing was done by CFIA on two carcasses. It is commonly believed that PCR testing is limited and contradictory. PCR is not the gold standard testing method and is not recommended as a diagnostic tool. And this is exactly why you shouldn't have contracted with them by agreeing to their request. Had the farm remained private instead of acquiescing, this whole thing could have been avoided. But this fight certainly isn't over. And remember, Katie herself said that she is willing to learn more about the problems within the field of virology. But at this stage in the game, we should be focusing on one thing. And that one thing is that the finger of blame should ultimately be pointed at the government and the agencies that they use to invade our private property. Let me know your thoughts on this video report in the comment section below. And if you do appreciate my efforts to bring you this type of information, please consider making a contribution at pressfortruth.ca/donate. Or if you would like to contribute to my next expose, please contribute to this Go Get Funding campaign where I will be attending the annual Bilderberg conference that is being held in June in Stockholm, Sweden. If that is something that you would like to support, please check the links in the description below. And that wraps up my video report on the Universal Ostrich Farms in Edgewood, BC. Guys, please be sure to click the thumbs up button, share this video far and wide, and stay tuned, my friends. We're going to have more video reports coming soon, God willing. This is Dan Dicks reporting for Press for Truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free.